days insane. 120 days total.
The turnover is just
because it's
yeah.
We're going to in a few moments.
regular stuff. 120 days insane.
But they could do 180 days just bouncing around different schools. It's school, not district. It's correct.
And then they can also apply for request.
They didn't bring back the special education.
Everyone, it's 9:34. I'd like to call this meeting of the Certification Advisory Committee to order on Tuesday, April 3rd, 2018. Could we have the roll call, please, Melissa?
Chair Peasley?
Here.
Member Tebow?
Here.
Member Farah?
Here.
Member Demler?
Here.
Dr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Member Crow?
Here.
Member Vanderway?
Here.
Dr. Lighting?
Here.
Member Garcia?
Here.
Member Weber? Dr. Horn?
Here.
Dr. Courtbridge? Member Spear?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I would like to start the meeting with the Executive Director's report, and that's coming from Ketcher. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, good morning. Quick update, as we always do, on where certification rules are that came through this committee. So at the March board meeting, the board voted to close rulemaking on that new middle grade certificate, and I believe ADE sent out some communications related to that. It's on our website. The certification package was also submitted to the Secretary of State's office. So that'll be a part of their quarterly register, which will be out soon, hopefully. And then hopefully in the next couple of months, that'll get engrossed into the actual administrative code. The board also received an update on the proficiency assessment rule, which, if you recall, moved some of the antiquated language out of that rule, and also made sure that all of the proficiency assessments pointed to that rule rather than having them scattered throughout certification. And then at the upcoming meeting, the agenda isn't finalized yet, but we are anticipating closing the rule on the proficiency assessment, which was provided an update at that last board meeting, and also an update on the other certificates, other teaching certificates. It's been a while since this committee's seen that rule. We've been working with some stakeholders and ADE on trying to fine-tune some of that, so the board will receive an update on where we're at with that. And then there will also be a public hearing coming up on the proficiency assessment rule in the next couple weeks. We don't have a date firm yet, but that'll be coming soon. So a very brief update. We don't have a legislative update on some of the certification stuff that's coming through because, by and large, it's status quo from where we were at the last meeting. A lot of those bills have slowed down, but we do anticipate at the next meeting session will probably be wrapping up, hopefully, around that time, and we'll be able to provide this committee with some more firm items on what it'll need to take action on to conform and comply with the legislation that's coming down. We'd like to get that work started, hopefully at the May meeting, so that'll provide enough time for the committee to deliberate, for the board to open rules, to get stakeholder feedback, and then to hopefully adopt by the time it becomes effective in August, usually. So if there are any questions on that, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, we can move on to the next part of the Deputy Director's report.
Okay, any questions? Thank you. We'll go on to the next one.
So, as some of you may be aware, the board has recently moved to a new web-based portal for its board materials. Previously, just like we do with this committee, we really just sort of throw all the materials into a big PDF document. That can be clunky, it can be difficult to update, and frankly, we're a little behind on the technology even when it comes to school districts who have much more intuitive software. So we're pretty excited that we're moving to this web-based portal. It will allow not only for the big board meetings, but also for each of the committee meetings to use that software as well. So we're going to start transitioning all of the committees, including this committee, to Simbly, which is the new web-based portal. And so just a couple minutes, hopefully Kellen's going to walk you through what that looks like, and he put it together sort of a mock-up based on this meeting, and that'll give you an idea, and then he'll give you some insights on next steps for this committee and how it'll work. So, Kellen.
Good morning, Chair Peasley and members of the committee. As most of you know, Kellen Musley, one of the executive assistants to the board for those of you newer members here. So as Catcher mentioned, we have a new system that we're using to deliver the board materials to the board meetings. And we did it for the last few board meetings, and we will only be delivering it this way for the board meetings. And as he mentioned, we're now transitioning to doing it for our committees as well. So I hopped on this morning and just started recreating the agenda items and materials here in the system so that you can get an actual look at the system. So first things first, you will have a login, so you will be receiving some email correspondence from us over the coming weeks, definitely at least before the next committee meeting. And it's going to give you a login. There will be a couple training materials. The system's really very simple from the standpoint of the committee members. It just has some very basic functionality, but we'll include some training resources in there as well. And so here it is. It's web-based, as you see. So on our website, the way we currently have it is it'll say view meeting materials, and as you know, it'll be a big PDF, or also that's how we send it to you in a big PDF. Instead, now you're just going to receive a link, and it's going to take you to this web page, and then you'll log in. The benefit of logging in is you'll be able to take notes. As you can see, you have your sticky note here, and those are saved there indefinitely. So you can click on the different items and navigate through it as the meeting's taking place and take different notes for each agenda item, and those will be saved there forever. So there's a lot of different benefits to it. And then again, the big benefits of this and the purpose were for delivery of materials. It's faster, much easier to manage, especially with the board meetings. We might send the materials and then have a lot of updates and things that change before the meeting actually takes place. This way, we can just update all of the committee or board members and the public at the same time. It just makes it a lot quicker, a lot more streamlined. And then so, going forward, ideally, we can still print materials for you guys, but that's another big benefit of this is we can just have the computers up there ready for the committee members when they arrive at the meeting. We can have Simbly pulled up. You can just log in if you want to take notes, and then it's just simple and easy to use. You have all the materials. But of course, if you still want physical copies, we could print those for you as well. And that's about it. It's pretty simple. I'll just kind of navigate through an item here. And this is probably the best feature, is just how simple it is to navigate. You just have all of your items right here. You click on the links, or you can use this next button, which is just very simple to use. And when you have an item, when you click on an item with an executive summary, it's going to pop up right here, as you see. And any attachments will be down toward the bottom. So you're not going to see the attachment just directly right there underneath the summary anymore like you're used to seeing. Instead, you'll just click the link, and it'll just pop up and open it, in this case, Microsoft Word. Or PDFs is what you'll typically see, but it might just pop up in another browser. And with that, happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Dr. Horn?
Thank you for your presentation. How will we send the materials to our constituents, to other people who want to know what's going to happen at the next meeting that we have? So how would we do that?
Chairwoman Peasley, Committee Member Horn, that's a good question. So there's a couple of different ways. So you don't actually have to be logged in order to view these meeting materials. So you could easily just go up here and copy the link, the URL, and send it to one of your constituents or whomever, and just say, hey, take a look at this meeting. There's also other ways. You could go to print options and save it as a PDF if you wanted. But the easiest way would probably be to just send them the URL, and they can view it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? I have a question. Thank you very much,
You're very welcome.
Kellen, for bringing this to our attention and taking us through this. I look forward to getting these links. This will be much easier for all of us. So if we log in, we get the sticky notes. We can do the sticky note option. Is that visible to everybody or just to us at our login?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's only visible to you at your login. So if I wasn't logged in right now, I can actually change my visibility mode if I go to public. So this is what the public would see. They would just see the agenda. I didn't actually publish this meeting yet. Otherwise, they would see the agenda items as well. But as you can see, there's no sticky note there. Those are just personal to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then you'll have the Surface tablets?
Yes, exactly. We'll have the computer set up. We'll have Assembly pulled up. You guys can just log in if you want to use it, but the materials will be waiting for you at the meetings.
I like that option. We can look at it at home. We can log in. We can make our notes on it and then come in here and log in. That sounds like a great system. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Oh, you technology, sophisticated people. It just fits right in with our agenda today, doesn't it? So I'm looking for public. I don't see public today. So this would be a time where we would read the information for the call to the public. We do have a guest presenter today, and we have State Board of Education member Ms. Janice Mack with us today. She's going to be talking with us about the computer science certification and endorsement, a proposed certificate. And what I would like to do is move item 4B to the next item on the agenda. So let's go ahead. Member Mack, welcome to Certification Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Chairwoman Peasley and members of the committee. Thank you for all the work you do. It's amazing to see how much work you do. So thank you again for all your work. I'm here today representing the Computer Science Task Force in Arizona. So we represent higher ed, nonprofits, K-12 school districts, leadership associations such as ASA, and a whole gamut of representation. Really, we are here to think about computer science in terms of equity and access. How many of our kids are getting access to it? Traditionally, this is a programming that's been only available to certain schools, perhaps, and we really want to work on increasing access and equity to this subject because it is a subject that leads to some of the highest paying jobs, and computing is ubiquitous wherever we look. And really, at the heart of it is having our students become not just consumers of technology, but creating with technology. Rather than playing video games, let's have them create their video games. Let's have them create apps for good. Let's have them think about how they can use computer science to benefit humanity, and really thinking in terms of the threats to our society in terms of cybersecurity and IT. We're all faced with these realities every day, and so we really are thinking about computer science in terms of education. And then, of course, along with that, computer science standards development has begun this year, due to come to the state board in October in the fall. And then in terms of that, we've also been looking at computer science teacher preparation and pathways. ASU has just opened up a position in their college for a computer science professor in the College of Education, hoping to hopefully build out a pathway for pre-service teacher preparation. That led the task force to then look at what's being done for in-service teachers. There's a lot of professional development out there, and what we really like to think about is looking at the technology industry today. You look at any tech company, and it's still about 15% women, but you look at research that's been done, women and underrepresented minorities are 8 to 10 times more likely to study computer science if they've been exposed to it in high school or early exposure. And so taking that put together, we're thinking early exposure really can make a difference. What's been done hasn't been working because it hasn't led to a change in that representation that we see in industry. And so kind of looking at existing pathways, but then also looking at what can be done now to really meet the demand and the need to really open up this field to underrepresented minorities, women, and so on. So thinking about that, it's a new way of professional development, a new way of educating teachers to really bring equity to the forefront and pedagogical strategies that are really going to engage all students. So thinking back to my classroom where I had 38 students in my class and 3 girls. You know, in a middle school classroom. So we can see we need to really be thinking about things like pedagogical strategies. How are we going to come up with a pathway that's really going to open it up for teachers? So with that in view and kind of a little background, I'm just sharing a few documents, and I just wanted to get some input from you all today so I can bring back to the task force. Unfortunately, 2 other people couldn't be here today at 9:30 in the morning, but I'll bring it back to the task force, and then we will hopefully be able to take your feedback and come back with something more solid. So this is, I want to go to, okay, so in the Department of Education, a document was put together that kind of shows the existing situation, and we don't want to necessarily, what happened?
It's working.
Okay. We don't want to necessarily change anything that currently exists. Like, we think just leave it as it is, as existing pathways. And, you know, we don't want to get rid of any of this necessarily. We just want to maybe consider and see what you all think about adding another alternate pathway. So keep what's here, because we are going to get people that come in from, you know, the industry that maybe want to come into the classroom and whatnot. So there are maybe people that do have 24 semester hours, you know, in computer science. There's some maybe that do have 30 semester hours and maybe do have the methods classes. And, you know, keep it as it is. We're not going to, you know, we're not out to get rid of any of this existing. But thinking realistically, the feedback from the task force is anybody with 24 to 30 semester hours of coursework in computer science is not going to be in the classroom teaching. They are going to be out there working in industry. And so that's really our major concern is there is the demand, there is the need. There is absolutely, definitely at the high school for computer science, AP Computer Science Principles is a new course that just came out. And that course is really designed to broaden that access. The way the framework of the course is designed, it really goes into, you know, just a lot more approachable pathways. It's not like you jump into programming and then you're expected to, you know, so it's really just given the coursework that's being offered now at high schools all the way down to K. I mean, I know kindergarten teachers teaching principles of computer science. You can teach computer science doing unplugged activities, you know, so given what's really happening in classes, what teachers actually need to teach computer science in a classroom, we would like to think about what are some ways to provide an alternate pathway where they wouldn't need 24 or 30 semester hours. So these are some other things. Again, the relevant work experience, great, keep that in there. You know, we don't have any issue with anything that's currently in place, except just really thinking about what is something else we could do for the teachers. So let's see, and this. All right, and then this has changed since I received this, but computer science has been added as another approved area on the list. So that's great to see that's highlighted so teachers can see, okay, I can check that box. And then, so these are just some questions that we had and things to consider. Before I do that, I'll just go into the questions. So basically some questions we have is, does Arizona currently have a logical pathway to build the necessary skills for K-12 computer science teachers? So what is actually needed to teach computer science in the classroom? Does it have a way for these teachers to obtain credentials and to acknowledge necessary skills to teach computer science, including computational thinking? And so really thinking in terms of no matter what field you're in, computational thinking is necessary. So even looking at U of A, I just found out that they have a whole department there called Digital Humanities. You know, I mean, it's, you know, you normally don't think about humanities and computer science, and it's now digital humanities because everything is just interwoven with computer science and computing. And so, so just really thinking about, you know, our general ed classroom teachers. Are we able to bring computational thinking across the curriculum into whatever we're teaching? You know, just, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's a way of thinking, a way of problem solving, a way of thinking about the world and how we can solve these problems computationally. In 2015, only 51 college graduates in the U.S. received an initial teaching certification in computer science. So that's according to the 2015 Title II reports. So this is kind of going to that previous document where there's really not that many that are actually graduating with these 30 credit hours and getting a teaching certification that are going to the classroom.
Excuse me, Member Mack.
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
Could you define computational thinking for us?
Yes.
Because I think some of us are still thinking computational thinking or algorithms. So,
of which algorithms are a part.
That's
So,
a part,
okay,
but
so computational thinking is a problem-solving process that humans use to solve problems in like a computer would. So, for example, how a computer might approach a problem is identifying patterns. When you've identified the patterns, then you are trying to eventually get to an algorithm or a recipe to solve that problem. But it involves decomposing the problem, analyzing it for patterns, looking for that structure in there, and then coming up with an algorithm or a recipe that could solve that problem. Does that help?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So, so then thinking about what pathway can Arizona create to align to existing teacher preparation, certification, endorsement pathways, while also looking to prepare elementary teachers and generalists in gaining a liberal arts fluency in computer science. So, and again, I think that just computer science maybe has, you know, this image in our brain of what a computer scientist is and does, you know, so I think we're kind of combating some of that, like what Chairwoman Peasley was bringing out. But hopefully that kind of, any other questions related to that? Okay. So these are some of the questions we had, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of those. With that, there's some information that we have that is the NES is piloting a test for computer science educators. We have looked at the framework. We quite like the framework, actually, what they're testing, so that's a good thing. And then the test information I've linked for you guys here. It's being piloted currently, and then they're hopefully releasing it for fall 2018. We're not saying go for this or not, but we're just saying, presenting you this information. And then some concerns that came from the field as far as computer science educators. There have been some, there's a number that have been computer science teachers and educators for decades. And we have a whole crop of, you know, ones that are teach math and science as well as teach computer science as part of their load. And so we have a whole crop of these teachers now, whereas we have a whole crop who have been teaching computer science for decades as part of their CTE, for example, or as part of business in, you know, previously. And so there's kind of this range. And so the ones that have been in the classroom teaching computer science, they're asking, is there a way to grandfather these people in? And the thing that's really at the top of their mind is obviously they don't want to get those 24 credit, you know, hours. And if they could maybe take the test, you know. So those are some things that are coming from the field. The other thing is, what are some thoughts around leveled or tiered certifications? Some other states have done that, where they recognize that not everybody needs this level to teach, you know, even computer science safety principles necessarily. And so is there a thought to maybe do level 1, level 2, level 3? If you're teaching this course, this is what you would need. If you're teaching this course, this is what you would need. So there's options and models that we could look at based on what you give me today. Other states are, like Texas is basically using the Praxis. I mean, and so then what they've done is built up a whole test prep support program around that test, and so there's courses that teachers can take for that. I think our main concern is that, again, the teachers get that well-rounded approach, and that we are reaching more kids and more diverse kids, and I think that's a big concern. Some other states approach it by, so if you're a math teacher, for example, and your computer science course is part of your math load, then it's waived. So depending on the department you're teaching in. So there's, I'm sure the department is very familiar with some of these models as well. So we're kind of just seeking guidance, and then we would like to see where this goes. I would just like to address any questions that you might have. Yes.
Thank you.
Member Crow.
I represent the public, so excuse my ignorance, but what is NES?
Oh, the educator exams. I'm going to National Education Service. Yeah, from. Is it
The National Education Service.
I don't know. So it's a peer
evaluation
exam. So basically, yeah, educator exams. Yeah, and this is what Arizona currently uses. So some states are use more Praxis, and then we are an NES. Yeah,
That's the company that provides the teacher tests.
correct. Yeah.
Dr. Horn?
In your previous slide,
Yeah.
I think it was number 2, where you clicked on what the programs were, your suggestions about what you considered a way to become certified with the certificates. It was the second slide.
This one?
And you had to click on
The link.
the link.
Oh, current options. Okay.
I wasn't one like for the specialized subject matter expert or the specialized secondary STEM certificate. Doesn't that include experience? So wouldn't that take care of the teachers who are already teaching computer science?
Yes, but I think the issue here is as long as they fulfill this requirement. I see what you're saying. The experience teaching computer sciences. So 5 years in STEM and experience teaching computer science courses at a community college. For it would, in the particular person that asked the question, it should meet her specification. Person I'm thinking of. It doesn't specify teaching at a secondary level. I
Bruce?
guess that might be the question.
Do you have some
Chairman Beasley,
clarification?
Member Horn. So, just to clarify, subject matter expert would be considered 5 years work experience would be the way we look at it, and an LEA can certainly evaluate that differently, but we look at it as industry work experience. But if a teacher currently holds an elementary or secondary certificate and has 3 years teaching in computer science, so they taught full-time, it doesn't need to be full-time in computer science, but they taught computer science for 3 years, they could not only waive the test if that were ever to be adopted, but they could use that experience to waive the 24 credit hours and add computer science approved area to their regular teaching certificate.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there was a mechanism already in place so that doesn't have to be something special.
And then this is current, correct? This is not proposed. This is current pathways to get these and the endorsements or the certificates. Are there any other questions from committee members? Online, do we have any questions?
Madam President.
Yes, hello.
Hi, this is Frank Henderson. Member Mack, thank you for the information. I'm excited to hear kind of these options for teachers. I'm fortunate we have an amazing teacher who's currently teaching computer science. And she was fortunate enough to go through the Exploring Computer Science training PD in Colorado last year. And so I think one of the things I'd recommend with those pathways is what are some of the outside organizations offering as far as training in PD. For instance, she got, I want to say, upwards of 50 hours of PD, both a week-long training in Colorado and then a year-long PD projects. That taught her the entire curriculum, provided the resources, and so I think not just the college coursework, but also what are some of these outside organizations, the National Science Foundation, what are they offering that could be considered, you could take those course hours towards and apply them towards a college credit course hour in some way.
Thank you, Member Hendrickson. I am very familiar with exploring computer science and the research base behind it, and completely agree. It is high quality. It really gets at the equity, and the whole foundation of the creation of that curriculum was to address diversity issues in computer science out of LA Unified School District. And as a result of it's ongoing research, honestly, but they have it's out of NSF, and they continue to offer professional development. So I couldn't agree more that there are high quality providers that do take into account these issues that we've been talking about today. Yeah.
Good. I think they're greatly aligned with what you guys are trying to do. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else on the phone? My turn. We have, this is great. Thank you so much, Member Mack, for bringing this information to the Certification Advisory Committee. And we certainly want to help in any way, help the task force to come up with a rule presentation that would get us through this. Some information that would be helpful would be, you've mentioned what some other states are doing. When we are looking at new certificates, we usually we have been asking, what are the other states that have the certifications, and what do their certification requirements look like? Not asking for the, great big all the data and all the documentation, but that's something that the task force can then bring to the committee to share with us what other states have it. That's going to be very helpful.
Okay.
You mentioned that there are some states that have different levels, and I certainly applaud that thinking, because we do have different levels of teaching computer sciences, and so what that looks like in those other states, bringing that information to the committee.
Okay.
Then I think also, and Member Hendrickson referred to this, what's happening here in Arizona? What are who are the universities, private colleges that are offering the classes? What do those classes look like? And then if we're talking about doing a grandfathering, what kind of a category would those folks then fit into, given the amount of changes that there has been in the field of computer science? Okay. So being able to have that discussion with the committee would be so helpful.
All right. Thank you. That's valuable guidance.
Yeah, are you thinking?
Go ahead.
Yeah, are you thinking of continuing ed for people who are grandfathered in? Is that what you're?
We leave that up to the task force, to the stakeholders that are presenting this, to come up with ideas, suggestions, recommendations for that. Also, an opportunity, and that would also be any recommendations for renewal. But thank you for bringing that up.
Member Lighting, is there a thought you had behind your question?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
The other thing is, I just want to second that level thing is very interesting to me, because I think that there's definitely things that teachers can be doing in kindergarten.
Yeah.
There's information for them to have.
Okay.
If we can get them trained starting in kindergarten, I think that would be really great.
Thank you.
Right.
Member Crow.
The one question I have is, how far behind are the computer teachers from today's computer programming?
Can you rephrase that?
Okay. New programs come out all the time.
Yes.
And how are they keeping up with it and managing to teach that to the kids? Okay,
that's a great question, actually. So, and I don't know, I'm going to answer this the best I can through experience, but also through what I see. So we're coming back to computational thinking, and I'm going to speak from a teacher point of view. So when I taught third grade, I actually started with computer science because I had a student ask me, Ms. Mack, how do I make a website? And I'm like, you go to Google and you create sites and you make it. And he's like, no, I want to know how to code it. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. So then I reached out to my director of IT, and then we taught them HTML, and the kids were like, this is like learning a new language for them. They're just like, quick, 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 right? And HTML is used in the field. But it was then as an educator that I realized these kids, to them, learning a new language is not a big deal. A semicolon, a backslash, you know. And I realized for them what was really important was the thinking behind it and the computational thinking, so that no matter what language they use, no matter what problem they're trying to solve, they can think through it and analyze and how to solve it. So no matter what programming language, what vehicle, the computational thinking is foundational. And so that's when I really started to get into actually block-based programming, which is actually used at Harvard, you know, for a part of their freshman year course, and really had them use block-based programming to analyze problems, to be able to solve it, to debug, and those are all industry practices, to be able to solve a problem, debug, persevere, think through it. So that's one piece of it. So I feel like computational thinking is essential to be part of whatever we do. And as far as the languages, so now I'm more recently teaching 6th grade, and I teach them HTML and CSS, cascading style sheets, and they have been able to create their own websites from scratch. And then they are also learning JavaScript in order to create animations and video games. So those are all also used. And then Python is another one that's commonly used in industry across. But I mean, my focus is less on the languages, I would say, but really at the heart of it is that computational thinking. And so that transfers through whatever they're learning, and they learn that it's a tool, and it's a tool used for a specific purpose, just like we do in reading and writing. It's a tool to get to a goal. And so then they've got the more tools they have in their toolbox, that's great. But I don't know if that helps.
There was a mention of the test and CTE. Would CTE teachers getting certification under CTE requirements, would they be required to take the test or not? And that's a question to our certification folks.
Yeah. Chairwoman Peasley, at this time, no, and in the future, we're not aware that they would be able to, or they would be required to take the test. They're required to take the professional knowledge exam, but not the content knowledge, because they already have that experience coming in.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Member Mack, thank you so much for coming today.
For your time and
if there's any other information that we could possibly provide to you, or assistance or support, just let us know. But I just thank you.
No, thank you
Absolutely.
For all your work. Thank you.
All right.
And we will definitely do due diligence and follow up on those points. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. We will now go back to our regular agenda order. And that is item 3, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding proposed amendments to the following. AR 72601 regarding definitions.
Madam Chair, members, item 3A and also item 3B are connected in that one should really be going with the other. So I just want to put that out there before I hand it over to the department, because they are connected. 601 is the definitions. On the attachment, you'll notice that there's some highlighted sections. This committee did see the definitions revisions at the previous meeting, and the department and the board staff met recently to discuss some additional changes, and that's what's highlighted, and that's what we're putting before the committee today. And so with that, most of these changes came, all those changes actually came from the department, which is seeking some clarity for some items. So I think I'll just hand it over to Keith and Bruce to go over that, if that's all right with them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Catcher.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this all came about, and just let me refresh your memory. I think we talked about this last month or a couple months ago. Under No Child Left Behind, we had the highly qualified. And that went away with No Child Left Behind. So under ESSA, it now points to the state certification rules to be what we're calling appropriately certified. So we didn't have a definition for appropriately certified. So that's one thing that we identified and came up with was a definition. And then we also had some other terminology that was used under No Child Left Behind, such as primary teaching position. That's no longer used as well. So we broke it apart and we went with a single subject and a self-contained classroom. So self-contained classroom and a single subject classroom. So single subject classroom, obviously it's like the departmentalized. And then we have the self-contained classroom where you have the same group of students and you teach different subjects throughout the day. So we've identified that as far as the definitions in 601. So did you have a chance to look at those? Does anybody have any questions on those?
I'm wondering if line 9 under appropriately certified means holding the certificate endorsement, says and approved. Should that be or approved area that is required for a teaching assignment? Just asking, but it looks like you need to have it all.
I believe we used and for a specific reason, but let me think about this. Yeah, it does make sense that it should be or, because you don't have to have an endorsement or an approved area to be appropriately certified.
Right, because
you're in elementary.
But you may need them all.
Yeah, you may need them all.
You may need them all.
Teaching.
But I'm thinking pardon me?
And or.
Could be an and/or.
So, and then as required, and so we have a kind of a plan that helps define that down the road. But in the case of my certification, I hold a secondary certificate with the approved area of music, and if I'm going to teach 4th grade band, I have to have the certificate and I have to have the endorsement. But if I'm going to teach certain levels, I have to have the approved area. So in some cases, it is an and. But it's case by case, and
I think we used and because if you continue reading, it's and an area that is required for a teaching assignment. So it may or may not be required.
For the assignment.
Because we had this discussion before, because that's the first thing when I read it. It's like, why doesn't this say or? And then that discussion, because it says that is required for a teaching assignment.
Right. So you've had that discussion. We've had this question. That's going to create all kinds of challenges at the counter. So I'm wondering if perhaps we can do a little bit of wordsmithing. We may need to add a few more words to bring clarity to this definition so that people aren't going to be saying, excuse me, because like in special education, there are no endorsements. And there are some other certificates that don't have any endorsements. We don't have CTE endorsements, do we? I think we just have the certificates.
Well, you can't look, for example, I have a business and a marketing endorsement on my
Oh, you do have endorsements there. So that's just why it's going to create some difficulties. So can we try to look at that? Anybody have some ideas?
Madam Chair, we can certainly look at that and revisit that, because I know we'll be coming back next month with some additional information regarding this change as well.
So we're not necessarily looking to make a recommendation today?
Correct.
You're okay with holding it off for another month? I think we need to get a few more words in this definition to bring some clarity so that you don't have all of those questions and creating consternation out there. Well, gee, I only have the one certificate. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any questions on self-contained classroom or single subject classroom?
No, that seems to be what we've discussed. Anybody have any questions? Dr. Horn?
I have a question about the capstone experience. Why did you exclude elementary, secondary, and special education from listing? You've listed administration, counseling, school psych, or alternative path, but you didn't mention elementary, secondary, or special education for the capstone experience. Is there a reason for that?
Madam Chair, Dr. Horn, I do think that we did talk about this last time. That capstone experience definition we pulled from an existing definition under the Educator Preparation Program rules, and we just plugged and played because we didn't want to mix with it too much if we were using an existing definition. And that list of all of the student teaching or internships in administration, et cetera, is a may include sort of but not limited to kind of list. So as the rule reads, it would not exclude elementary or secondary necessarily. I don't know why when the educator prep program rule was established for capstone experience, they listed out those specifically. My guess is that they felt important to call out student teaching or internships and counseling and school psychology. There must have been some sort of interest to make sure that those were included. But as it's, I think, to sum up, as it's written right now, it would not exclude necessarily elementary and secondary. It's just not listed out in the may include but not limited to list.
These other areas identified, administration, counseling, school psychologist, and alternative path pre-K-12 teaching, do not have a student teaching requirement. They have internships that are required, but any of the elementary or secondary teaching or the special education teaching certificates, those programs do require student teaching. So I think it makes good sense to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
One more question.
Go ahead.
Just referring back to the presentation, when she talked about Explore Computer Science was really a good program, in line 7, when you're talking about, or line 8, when you're talking about associations approved by the board, I take it that that program would present itself to the board to be approved in that area. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Dr. Horn, this line 8 is specifically referring to the list of topics that are going to be required in August of next year that are required for certification.
Okay.
So it really doesn't go along with that.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Anybody on the phone have any other questions so far? Then we had talked about at the last meeting a possible definition for institutional recommendation. We did talk about that a little bit. As I see some smiles over there. It's like, did we not want to go there? What is it listed someplace else?
Madam Chair, at this time we do not have a draft of a definition for an institutional recommendation.
I would like to have some conversation among the committee members to see, is this something that we want to do? We have institutional recommendations, as we understand it, that come from our colleges and universities. It's the letter that the applicant gets from attesting that they have completed the requirements of the educator preparation program. So there's also a requirement, it's in rule that alternative teacher preparation programs, some of them also are providing an institutional recommendation. So we had some discussion before about, do we need to have a definition of what an institutional recommendation is and what it means, what that does signify?
Madam Chair, there is a definition for institutional recommendation in 604, which is the educator prep program approval process.
Oh, okay.
So we're trying to pull that up right now.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members, so that institutional recommendation means a form developed by the department and issued by a professional preparation institution that indicates an individual has completed a board-approved educator preparation program. That would be inclusive of alternative as well as traditional.
Yeah. Okay, then that would, because the alternative preparation programs are board approved. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to close that discussion loop. So that takes care of my questions. Anybody else have any other comments? Are we good to go? Close that loop? Okay, thank you very much.
So that was the definitions, but if you go to, we're also proposing changes in R72607, the general provisions. If you turn to page 2, you'll see that M there's some strike-throughs as well as some new language. And since ESSA now points to the state certification requirements, it was referring back to R72301 and R72302, which are the common school requirements as well as the graduation requirements. Those requirements, we had some concerns with those requirements, the way they're specifically laid out right now, because 302 identifies social studies, but it also breaks out social studies with like economics and history and those items, whereas science does not. So for the past many years, I don't know how many years, it has always been that if you have a social studies approved area, you could also teach all those subcategories under social studies. However, science is just the opposite. You cannot have a general science and be in that, in the terminology they use, highly qualified to teach chemistry or physics or biology. So in order to keep everything the way it is, the status quo, those first three lines there, you can see 5, 6, and 7 are lined out, and we are proposing some new language. Unless otherwise specified, individuals who hold a valid Arizona elementary, middle grades, or secondary certificate or special education certificate that includes grades 6 through 12 may add an approved area to their certificate. So it, like I said, it keeps the status quo that if you have social studies, the way it read originally, you would have to go back and take those additional exams or have a waiver to meet those requirements. So that's one reason why we came up with this language. And also, if you look down at V and W, V, the single subject classroom teachers in 6 through 12 are required to be appropriately certified for the subject they teach for the greater part of the instructional schedule. So this is where that primary teaching position comes in. If a teacher is assigned 2 or more subjects of equal parts of their instructional schedule, the teacher is required to be appropriately certified in each subject. So if you have a teacher who's teaching, let's say, 2 sections of chemistry and 2 sections of physics, they would be required to have physics as well as chemistry. If they're teaching, let's say, 3 sections of physics and 1 section of chemistry, they're only required to have the physics approved area. And then W, the requirements to be considered appropriately certified for a self-contained single subject or other classroom shall be established in certification guidelines for teaching assignments, which will be board approved. This, if you think back a few months ago when we talked about the CTE certificates, remember all that language? These are all the CTE certificates. It's kind of like a guidance document. Right. We are developing something similar to that right now that will identify which approved area is required for the subjects that are being taught in elementary high school, or I should say 6 through 12. So it's kind of like a guidance document, but it would be approved by the board. Instead of listing everything out here in board rule, it would be a separate document. And someone could go on our website and they could search, okay, this is what I have right now, and it will bring up a list, okay, well, this is what you are or what you will be appropriately certified to teach. Or someone could go on and say, okay, I want to teach this, and then it would tell you, okay, this is what you need to have in order to be appropriately certified to teach that specific content. We don't have the matrix complete at this time. That's something we're planning to bring back at the next Certification Advisory Committee meeting for you to take a look at that time. It's still kind of rough, and we're still gathering some more information to make sure it's a complete document.
May I ask a question? That's exciting because we have been asking about that for a number of years, because that would so help with the confusion out there. I think it would also help with reduce the traffic and the phone calls and the emails, because people would be able to take a look and see what they've got. So we have a question, Dr. Lighting. Oh, Ms. Vanderway?
And I must apologize because I don't know the historical context of this. But my question is in regards to W and the requirements to be considered appropriately certified for self-contained single subject, where when I look at the definition for self-contained and single subject, they're opposing. You know what I mean? Like on the previous document, they're
They're separate.
They're separate, and so I guess what would the context be to combine the two?
The Madam Chair, Member Vanderway, the document that I referred to, that's kind of like a matrix. It has a listing for whether you're self-contained, what you need, whether you're a single subject, whether you're a special ed teacher. All the different categories are listed on that teaching matrix. Okay. So that's why they're all listed here. Self-contained, single subject, or other classroom shall be established in that document.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
And this is being constructed to address the appropriately certified.
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay. And you are working with ESS on the various delivery models for special education?
Madam Chair, we're actually pulling the course connection catalog and looking at everything that is being taught right now. And we are reaching out to other units as necessary to get their feedback and input as well.
Because that'll be important, because in special education, we do have a few other items that don't fall under this, but still should be dealing with appropriately certified. Thank you. Let's see, Marisol?
So I'm going to go back to the similarities that you're saying regarding science and social studies. So the teachers who are currently, for instance, I think more so high school than middle school, teaching an econ class and a U.S. history class, for instance, how is that going to push them out or force them to change what they currently have, or will those folks be grandfathered in?
Madam Chair, Member Garcia, it will be status quo.
Okay.
Whatever, if they were considered highly qualified to teach those content areas, they will be considered appropriately certified.
Because, like you mentioned, in social studies, there isn't the.
Right.
I mean, I took mine in California, so it was 3 separate tests that we had to take, so it's a lot more rigorous than when I had to take it here. But then my second question. The concern I have with that and kind of the messaging around that is because of the new standards that are out do change what is happening, particularly in middle school. The 8th grade strand is completely different than it is currently. So I don't want teachers in 6th to 8th grade feel like, okay, because they changed the standards, now we're seeing this is a little bit, there's so much hitting them at once as well as the science. So if you're saying that they're fine, they're going to have to do their own professional development to get prepared to change the content that they're teaching, because for 7th and 8th grade, it is different. I don't want them to feel like, oh, now I need to go get a separate credential because of the two just coming at the same time might be confusing.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Member Garcia, it's pure coincidence.
Okay.
They will not have to go out and take another exam or anything like that. Okay. If this goes through, and of course the committee recommends it to the board and the board approves it.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Can I weigh in?
Yes.
So, Dr. Lighting?
Did you want to say something? No.
Bruce, go ahead first.
Okay. Madam Chair, members of the board. So, members of the committee, excuse me. So what we're seeing at the counter is a lot of confusion about what approved area do I need. And so definitely a matrix will help define that. Another thing we asked for guidance on was the Rule M, as it has stood for a long time. And so information we were receiving is that that's what defines our approved areas. And so if you look at the graduation requirements for social studies, it specifically lists history, as Keith said, history and economics. And so if you follow that logic, we would absolutely have to have social studies teachers have history or economics, which is counter to the guidance following NCLB going away, which was social studies is fine, as well as many applicants coming in under reciprocity with social studies approved areas. And so to address that, striking that, and then defining it and putting it in a matrix, we'll end up suggesting and proposing that if you want to teach history in high school, certainly a secondary with history or a subject matter expert with history would be fine, but as well as a social studies approved area. So we're going to take that into account so that it represents what's happening today in the field. And that's what we would push forward. Additionally, defining the single subject classroom as well as, and I just lost the definition, the self-contained classroom really helps address the nuances with the special ed education in high school. So prior, under highly qualified days, so a resource teacher who saw the same group of kids for multiple periods but taught 4 different content areas, at one point was advised that they needed to add all 4 approved areas.
Right.
But they were like an elementary school teacher. They were seeing multiple contents. And so now this definition allows that to be considered and say, indeed, you're a self-contained classroom and your certificate is enough. And you don't need the multitude of approved areas. We just ran into a situation yesterday with a credit recovery lab. The question was a credit recovery lab where the teacher, who has got a secondary certificate, has got 5, 6 different content areas all happening at once in the classroom for the same group of kids, and that's their primary, that's their schedule, that's the kids they see. And so do they need 6, 8, 10 different approved areas? Well, if you follow this definition that we're proposing, they'd be a self-contained classroom and they wouldn't need all of those approved areas. So indeed, it allows a little bit of flexibility, helps clarify this, and some reasonableness, maybe.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm glad you brought that up about the credit recovery, because that's been a discussion here before in past years. That's excellent. Thank you. On our members on the phone, any questions, thoughts? Somebody say yes or no. Are you there?
Yes, and thank you for, this is Sarah, thank you for asking the questions that need to be asked. Been listening.
All right, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Catcher.
To the point that Bruce just made, this will be status quo, so it won't be pushing folks out of classrooms that they're teaching now. We want to make sure that we emphasize that although it will be shifting how the rule is structured and with the matrix, the intent and the effect will not be to add additional requirements for folks who are already teaching those subject areas. The department put some good information in the executive summary as to why this is happening, and I think something that's not in there that we also want to emphasize is in subsection M, it does point to the minimum course of study for K-8 and also the graduation requirements for high school. And so what we were running into is when we were modifying some of those minimum course of study and graduation requirements recently, just for clarification and for technical and conforming changes, we didn't realize when we were making some of those changes that it had a direct effect on certification and what we are considering approved areas. And just as a practice, we felt that it was not good practice to point certification to the minimum course of study and graduation requirements, especially in some of those minimum course of study, we list out, may include but not limited to. And then if we include a may include list, then maybe that throws a wrench into what certification has to issue as approved areas. And if it's not on the list, what do we do then? Especially because when we adopt those, when the board adopts those minimum courses of study and graduation requirements, their first priority is not how will this affect certification in approved areas. And so it certainly cleans up the approved areas and the guidance that came out from NCLB going away and highly qualified, but it also helps clean up the relationship between the minimum course of study and certification. And we won't have that tie and have to worry about that moving forward when we go through this. So just a couple of things that I wanted to sort of add on to what the department had mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, a question on the phone? Did I hear somebody? Okay. Matt?
It sounded like they were going to say something.
But well, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the matrix on Simbly. We can take a look at that, and I think that's going to be really important for all of us to look at that. And I'm going to ask a question about timing of that, because I'm guessing that's going to be a pretty big document. Mm-hmm. And do you think we could have it 7 to 10 days prior to the meeting?
Madam Chair,
try?
we will do our best.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's going to be a lot to digest, and as we will all take a close look in particular at our areas of expertise as we serve in the capacity on this committee. So we don't have any recommendations at this point for a vote. My understanding this now has just gone for information, and looking forward to getting that matrix document. Then if we're ready, are we ready to go on to item 4A? R72614 regarding other teaching certificates, including substitute certificates and emergency substitute certificates. Catcher.
Madam Chair, members, item 4A was added at the request of Dr. Corporich, who unfortunately is unable to join us here today, but it's still a discussion that he wanted to make sure that the committee had, and it's information only, but we can always bring it back to when he's here. The executive summary outlines the requirements for the substitute and emergency substitute certificate, and I don't want to speak too much for Dr. Corporich, but one of the reasons that he requested that the committee discuss this is the fourth bullet point on the substitute certificate, and also the fourth bullet point on the emergency substitute certificate, and that is the limitation on how many days that these individuals can teach in the same school in the same school district. For some of the more rural LEAs, well, even in urban LEAs, but rurals especially, lean on some of these folks in the current situation that we're in terms of finding standard certified individuals to fill those positions. And clearly the 120 days does not stretch throughout an entire school year, though the substitute certificates are a little bit different. And so he wanted to bring that up to discuss why that limitation on the 120 days, and he also had a clarifying question that I think the committee should discuss briefly. But one thing I did want to provide as a little bit of extra information is that at the very end of that executive summary, that this is a conversation that has happened previously and has happened since as well. In 2008, this committee recommended removing the limitation for both the substitute and emergency substitute certificate holders of that 120 days and just striking it out. That recommendation went to the board, and the board did not take action on it, which sometimes happens. And so since those limitations have been put into place, this conversation has always happened as to, should we take it off? Should we provide more flexibility? And so I wanted to provide that a little bit of extra context. And before opening it up to the committee for discussion, I did want to throw a question over to the department, because there has been some question as to how that 120 days applies, and whether for the substitute and emergency substitute, if it's per school or per school district, and how that works. So hopefully the department could provide some insight into that.
Okay, thank you. Sure. Keith?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, a substitute certificate is valid for 120 days in the same school, or it can be utilized 120 days in the same school. Now, if they're in the district, they can teach in several different schools the whole school year. An emergency substitute has to be requested by the district or the charter school, and that allows that individual to teach 120 days. That's it for the year, because it's specific to that LEA who requests it. So they can only teach 120 days. Whereas a regular substitute, they can teach all year, but only 120 days in the same school. Madam Chair, Member Crow?
Okay, thank you.
Is this 120 consecutive days?
It does not have to be consecutive, Member Crow.
I have a question. Member Garcia?
So my question is it's the LEA's responsibility to track that and report that. Is there a reporting mechanism, or just their responsibility, you all don't know?
Madam Chair, Member Garcia, it is the LEA's responsibility to track that. We do not monitor that.
So you would know if there were 180, 300?
Correct.
280.
Correct.
We're all teaching 300, okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Member Weber?
I'm confident one of the reasons why Dr. Corporation wanted this to be covered is, particularly in the rural areas, we often have teachers that just don't show up. I mean, they'll sign their contract. Holbrook is a good example where Dr. Corporation is a superintendent, and even the career and technical education area, I always have at least one or two teachers among the 11 high schools we serve where for whatever reason the teacher doesn't show up. So then what do? And you just get the students going on a curriculum, and that 120 days can be very limiting. I see the other side of it. I mean, I really do, because we want to make sure we have the best teachers in the classroom, but it is very limiting, particularly in the rural areas.
That is correct. And the discussion that we have historically had on this has been around that issue. When in 2006, when the committee was started, and we had the discussion of the substitute certificates, there was a lot of concern that districts were just using substitutes because folks were familiar. The districts were not as concerned about getting highly qualified teachers because of the degree of comfort. And this was also before we had the stringent requirements for certification, some of them as No Child Left Behind. So the idea so that there wasn't that much concern in 2006. But then as the teacher shortage continued on, as our schools continued to fill with children, we didn't have as many teachers in the pipeline. We didn't have as many qualified applicants for positions. Then it made more sense let's take a look at that 120-day limitation, because that 120 days, when a substitute starts teaching the first day of school, that takes them out of the classroom just prior to the state testing windows. So that had just a significant negative impact on districts when students lost their teacher just a few weeks prior to the start of the testing, and then to have another substitute come along and try to get them prepared and review all the material that they'd covered so far in the different subject areas was too much. That wasn't effective. So the history lesson being finished now, this is why we're where we are today, and we're revisiting this again with some of us on the committee still having those same concerns. What I would like to do is get information from the committee members as to what your thoughts are about this issue, and where this isn't an action item, this is just for discussion, I believe, at this point. So I would like to get the input from all the committee members. Dr. Horn?
I have a question about why this becomes an issue when number 7, line 15 on page 1, says that they can be exempt from the limit on teaching the 120 days if you do these kinds of things. So I don't understand in the scenario that you mentioned, Chairman Peasley, why a superintendent would not ask for an exemption to the 120 days. So to me it is a moot point to continue the discussion about changing that deadline. So maybe the certification.
Madam Chair, Dr. Horn, there is an exemption that's in place for people who hold a substitute certificate, but that it is not in place for emergency substitutes.
Well, it really bothers me to think that a person with a high school diploma can teach all year long. So I don't believe there should be an exemption for it. I understand rural Arizona. I serve on their board, but we can just go so far with what we will allow, and I think it's ridiculous to think a high school graduate should be exempt from the 120 days. I know that causes a problem, but I feel like the rule as it is written is appropriate. There's a waiver there that can be an exemption that can be written, so I do not have a problem with the way it is currently written.
And I would like to note that the exemption can't be granted to the same individual more than 3 times. Right. So that is there as well.
Right.
So,
and Madam Chair, members, so by granting it no more than 3 times, that would, I guess, a question for the department, would that end up providing them with enough experience to waive the proficiency assessment because they're 3 years of teaching experience if it was the same subject in the same classroom?
They could if the legislature passes the law that counts substitute teaching time as full-time teaching. Then yes, that would waive that exam. Waive the capstone. Sorry.
Right. So, Madam Chair, members, I guess I was almost just thinking out loud. So it can only be provided an exemption to that same individual 3 times. The way that the current board rule is written is that experience that they're accumulating does not count towards full-time teaching experience. There is a bill that would say they could waive their capstone experience, but that if they wanted a standard certificate, they would still have to do the proficiency assessment. And presumably the same would go even if if we were just talking hypothetical, if those exemptions were granted to individuals, let's say no more than 5 times rather than no more than 3 times, that 5 times might start getting us closer to the subject matter expert. But I think we would still run into the same issue where substitute teaching experience doesn't count as full-time experience. So I guess that's just more food for thought in the conversation that we're having.
thank you. Mr. Weber, you've expressed your thoughts. Do you have any others?
Madam Chair and members, like I say, let me give you a quick example of just even this year. We had a teacher that didn't show up in one of our districts. It was a graphic arts class. They were able to find someone who did that on the side for a business, was able to bring her in. And having that continuity of that teacher in there the whole year. Now, obviously, that district then has asked for approvals to go beyond the 120 days. So I think as long as we do have that mechanism and that it's approved, like I say, I can totally understand where he's coming from because some of these districts that we serve, starting pay is $28,000. And so there's some that will sign a contract and then just not show up because they can't. The realities start to set in and they think, you know what, I can't do this. And so even if they do show up, they'll leave. I think as long as there's that mechanism to extend it so that you can have the continuity of the curriculum in the classroom, I'm willing to look at that. But I'm confident that's the perspective he's coming from, is because you get in some real tough spots.
Right.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I've kind of experienced the same thing. I used to be a principal in rural, like out in Page.
Yeah.
And I would hire teachers, and they would either not show up for their contract, or we would lose so many teachers, the week before Thanksgiving.
Exactly.
They would just resign. They wouldn't even care. They would just walk, and we would be sitting there looking at how to fill that 3-week gap before December, and we'd post the position over December and try to fill that seat, but then very rarely did we get a certified teacher in there.
Exactly.
And, I totally hear what you're saying about high school degrees and having qualified people in the classroom. In my situation, this is an elementary positions, and there are times when we've had mothers who have raised their whole family. They might just have a high school degree, but there are some extenuating circumstances where you do get a quality person in the classroom. I think for the little kids, my biggest concern is that it's just what you were saying, whether it be state testing or not, the biggest thing is that relationship. And if you have these kids who are first grade, second grade, third grade, and their teacher leaves because the 120 days is over, or however that might look.
They've already had their 3 extensions and they can't get a 4th.
It just becomes a dual thing. So it's quite a complicated situation, right?
It is, I'm sure.
Janet?
So what we're saying here is this is a blanket rule. So can't we split it down to say rural areas can do this? Because you're covering the whole state with one rule. And there's a lot of problems going on in individual areas.
We've had, the issue has been raised by a superintendent in rural area. Mr. Weber is also from rural, but I can guarantee you we've got the same problem in Phoenix and Glendale and Mesa, where all of the urban districts are facing the same issues. There are not students in college education programs to meet the need. There are not enough alternative pathway people out there in the alternative pathway programs to fill the classroom needs. And in some certificate areas, the burden is falling to the few certificate holders, and they're getting tired and they're getting burned out, and they're saying, this isn't what I signed up to do. As a special educator here and former administrator, I've sat in those exit interviews. Hey, when I got into this, I was looking at a caseload of 12 to 15, 18 students. I'm writing IEPs for 50 students on my caseload, and I've got a 45% turnover rate, so which means I've actually written 76 IEPs this year. And tracking students. This isn't what I am here to do. So, and when we get into those areas like special education, it's federally mandated, the services are provided, well, who's going to be able to do this? We take a look at the arts. And what happens when you can't find the art teacher? What happens when you can't find the band teacher? The band programs go away. Art goes away. There's enough research out there over multiple decades that shows the significant impact of art and music on direct achievement, on direct academic achievement. So the issue is not relative just to rural. It is the entire state of Arizona.
I can honestly say my grandniece graduated with an education, worked 1 year and said, screw this. I'm sorry, that's the way she talked about it.
Yeah. So it's not getting, the challenges are continuing to develop annually. So our task as the committee and the focus of the State Board of Education when it comes to certification is to find ways, paths to reduce the burden on school districts, to reduce the burdens on prospective teacher candidates to become teachers and apply. Janet?
Do you not think that maybe we're putting too much on the teachers? I mean, everything you have to do. I mean, Kim, you've known me for 50, 30 years.
Yeah.
And I've always been pro-teacher. Always. But I'm also pro-parent, should educate those kids. It's not the teacher's responsibility to make sure their kids have values. That's how I've always believed. So why can't we take less off the teachers and put more on the parents and criticize the parents?
Right. Well, that's more than our dear committee can address. Okay, let's see. Did I see hand, Member Garcia?
So I have a question about, and I think Member Peasley mentioned part of it, but that this is more not just a rural issue. This is an issue across the state. And thank you for, so I don't have to. But my question was the intern cert. So how the intern cert is another available option for the LEAs if they're in a program, as well as if they're in a grow your own program, right? Which is not necessarily defined by the department at all. It's defined by the LEA, whatever that should look like. So there's other options. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, okay. Madam Chair, Member Garcia. So there's the alt prep path through those approved programs, which is usually the higher ed programs, and then there's that classroom-based prep program, which is an option for LEAs to apply to the board for approval. None have applied so far. That's only been an option for since the legislation was passed last year, so it's really only been an option for technically a few months.
Okay.
But yes, those are two available options.
So then there's also the intern cert means that they're in a program somewhere. They could be taking one. Is there a minimum class, or they should be taking classes somewhere, or no?
Madam Chair, Member Garcia, it says that they must be enrolled in a program.
Enrolled.
So it doesn't specify full-time, part-time, but typically when you're enrolled in a program such as that, it's going to be full-time and you're on track to graduate within the year or 2 years, however long that program is. And just one thing to keep in mind, the intern certificate does require a bachelor's degree.
Right. Okay. So it does require a bachelor's degree to be within the intern cert.
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
All right. So just kind of going back to what we initially talked about, I have legitimate concerns regarding extending. I even have the legitimate concerns with the 3 years, because I feel like as a parent, let alone an educator, as a professional educator who's been trained on how to educate children, not just my content specialty, but actually the pedagogy that goes into instructional, success for my students. I am seeing more and more of the subcerts and the emergency subcerts being used to fill classrooms in really high needs areas, not just special education or exceptional students, but even more so the SEI classrooms where students are learning English. We're seeing these teachers being placed in these classrooms. So those students who are most vulnerable or have the most capacity to learn the second language, which is needed, are not being able to hit those strides. And even more so talking about how if we go down the path of schools and districts being evaluated on the specific state mandated test, and even more so getting additional monies, this is affecting this long-term effect that is happening is concerning to me. So I think that as it is lenient enough with all the certification changes that we've made over the last 2 years, is lenient enough. As a parent, I am concerned next year. I don't know who will be in front of my son, but I do know in 7th grade that in 5 years he will be competing against students from across the country that have had qualified educators in front of them. How prepared will he be at a university, either within the state or out of the state, because of these changes that we keep lowering standards? So I think this is enough. I think the crisis is clearly real, and we need to find other ways of dealing with it other than just pushing down. So that was as close as I could get without
Thank you.
going to the other side.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ketcher?
Do we have someone on the phone?
On the phone? Yes, I was going to ask that.
Madam Chair, this is Frank Henderson. So just give a couple of my thoughts and inputs. I think it's definitely a systemic issue, and there's lots going on with this teacher shortage, and we've even experienced it over here in the East Valley. Just to give you guys a little bit of content, the number of teachers, the schools that have had to have substitute teachers in place at the beginning of the year amount to almost 1,000 positions statewide, and so it's a very real problem. Even in affluent areas that I've worked in, I've had to have substitute teachers almost push that 120-day mark. You're not finding people after the start of the school year, so that's a real issue. As much as I never want to lower the standards and say, let's wipe out this 120-day mark, it's a real problem that we need to have more flexibility for schools in order to find someone that can be in there, that can be consistent, not have 4 or 5 subs for that classroom throughout the year. I think that's absolutely unfair to kids. The other kind of, to play devil's advocate here, one of the things I look at is this substitute certification, not the emergency, but the substitute. Those requirements to get that substitute certificate would allow you to be hired as a teacher in a charter school. So yet, as a district public school, we're saying we can't hire someone for a substitute over 120 days, yet those are different requirements to be a full-time teacher in a charter school. And so I think it's a little limiting to public schools. We are on the 20-day mark. So I would like to, under the substitute certificate mark, be able to see some more flexibility to be able to eliminate that. The emergency substitute, I agree with one of the members that mentioned a high school diploma and you're in there for an entire school year under emergency. I'd be a little leery of that, just because they're there are some life skills that I think you learn through college courses and job experience that you would be pertinent to being in the classroom longer than 120 days.
All right, thank you. Go ahead. Who's next?
This is Carolyn Demler.
Hey, Carolyn.
I kind of agree with everything that's been said. I certainly understand Member Garcia's concern and others as well that we absolutely want very well qualified teachers in front of our kids. But I am not even in a rural district, and I have to tell you, this is the first year that I am at a loss to know how we are going to fill our teaching position. This year is the worst that I've ever seen in 15 years in this office, and I think we have to know that districts are going to continue to look for the very best qualified people that they can. There's going to come a time when you have to put someone in front of your kids, and I can see that we have, for example, we have kindergarten aides who have worked as aides in the classroom for a long time, and they don't have a bachelor's degree, but they may very well be very competent in a kindergarten classroom for a full year. It's not my first choice. It's probably not even my fifth choice. But there are times that the choices that you have are pretty limited. I think we have to give districts as much flexibility as we can, understanding that it's in their best interest to find qualified people if they can possibly do it.
Thank you. Anybody else on the phone? Okay.
Chairman Peasley?
Yes.
This is Ann Tebow. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I have to attend another meeting, so I need to hang up, but I do have concerns about lowering the standards. And I do understand there's a need because we experience it and we're not a rural district and we do have positions that aren't being filled. So I see both ends of the problem, but it does concern me when we lower standards so low. So that's just my input there, and I need to hang up to attend the other meeting.
Thank you, Ann, for joining us today.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. And Mr. Member Wimber came in, so we still hold our quorum, right? Okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, this is Sarah Steer, and I agree with the comments that have been made thus far, but I believe that by lowering the standards, we are yet again devaluing the teaching profession, and I believe that we are creating another pathway for an unqualified individual to land in our classroom, and as such, I would not be able to support that.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have any other comments? Okay, well, thank you very much. This is a good discussion. A lot of very, very valid concerns on the multiple sides of this incredibly complex issue. It's not simple.
Absolutely.
It is challenging, it is difficult, and we can just continue to do the best that we can. If there's no other discussion on the item, then I think we're at Agenda 5, future meeting dates and items for our future agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 1st, 2018 at 9:30 here in the boardroom, and we can look forward to a matrix. And it sounds like also we may have some items that we can be looking forward to taking action on for consideration moving up to the State Board of Education. We also, Ketcher, you also mentioned that there would be likely to be a legislative update. And we still do have some of those bills that are in the works. Legislators have been keeping an eye on the State Board of Education agendas and how they've been dealing with certification. So I think this is going to be an important update for us. So I hope we see as many people as possible at our next meeting. And with that, The Certification Advisory Committee is adjourned at 11:07. Thank you very much, everybody. Safe travels.